Hello everyone, my name is Ariel. I'm a resident at the University of Toronto and I'm working with MD consultants to give you this video on how to prepare for your medical school interviews. In particular, the Ontario medical schools have made a few changes this cycle in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. So we're going to talk about how your interview prep might change, some new challenges that arise because of this virtual interview format. We're also in this talk going to take a step back and talk about the general purpose of the medical school interview, a few kinds of questions that you encounter in the interview that would be helpful to you in your practice. And we're going to talk about specific tips on how to answer some of these questions. So hopefully you're the best prepared and that you have a successful interview. I am a first year resident at the University of Toronto. I did my medical school at Western University, and before that I did my undergraduate studies at U of T. Let's talk about the new challenges from an internet interview. So you can either have an interview where you are interacting with people in real time, like in a Skype call, or you might have a pre-recorded interview where you have prompts given to you and then you kind of talk through the answer on your own. I think the new challenges that come from approaching it this way include environmental issues. So you need to be mindful of the environment you are physically conducting the interview in. So choose a room in wherever you are that is as quiet as possible and is as private as possible with minimal amounts of interruption. If you can hear outside, there is some construction, so don't do that if you can. The other issue is being comfortable in the room that you're in. So I see this as an advantage actually, because you can choose to be more comfortable. You can kind of interview in bed. I don't advise that. I think you should find like a desk where you are alert and ready to answer questions. And I encourage you to, I think you should definitely just dress up as if you were going for an interview in person to kind of get you in that right space. There are some technical issues which could be significant. So making sure your internet connectivity is good. Focusing on making sure your audio and your video works well. I think the best way to deal with technical issues are to anticipate them in advance and just making sure that all your tech works with practice. The last one, people have come to me concerned that they're missing on the person-to-person interaction. And I think that it's true that this interview is different. But I think that that's not a reason to be impersonal. I think you can still find a way to show that you are kind of a warm person, as if you were in a real interview. And so eye contact is not exactly the same, but I think you can still pay attention to your eye contact and your body language and how you're answering questions. The big thing that I want you to take away from this video is that it's true that there are new problems with this interview format, but I think the key is to just minimize the issues as much as you can, but don't panic. You are in control of a fair amount in the interview in general, and I think all you can do is really do your best. And so we're going to talk about how to do your best. And then hopefully that will be good for you. So here are a few tips that I have on preparing for this tech interview. So I would say dress up. So definitely dress up as if you're going to a real interview in a professional kind of way. Practice your whole setup beforehand. Try to set up so that your camera is kind of on a stable surface and is at eye level. You can have, it's nice to have a glass of water handy with you In the real interview, this often is the case. They often do give you a glass of water, so you can drink in between questions. And so, and then as you answer your questions, as in any interview, you want to be clear, concise, and complete. And for every question that they ask you, there is a purpose. We'll get into this about the purpose of the interview, but be thoughtful about that. Okay, what is the purpose of the medical school interview? So if you think about it, the whole application is to determine, are you a fit for the program? Are you going to be compatible with their team and with their patients? Are you on the same page in terms of goals for clinical research or education? And it's a way to make parts of your application stand out. In short, we could say that the interview is to determine if you will be a good medical student and a good future doctor. So that's kind of that's the big picture result that we're going for. How do we figure out what is a good doctor or a good medical student? I encourage you to reflect on that and think about the qualities that a good physician might have. But luckily, we do actually have a framework that's developed by the Royal College. And so it's easy to turn these into buzzwords, and I don't think you need to talk about every single one of these qualities in every question. But the qualities are here, but I'll just read them out. We have communicator, collaborator, leader, health advocate, scholar, and professional. And all this makes up a medical expert. This is a Googleable kind of thing. In terms of types of interview questions, this is a classification that I used when preparing for my residency interviews. But I think that it will help you in your medical school preparation as well. So first we have the classic bread and butter questions. An example of this is, tell me about yourself, or why do you want to be a doctor, or where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Next we have the behavioral type questions. So these are asking you to talk about a specific example. And one example of this question is, tell me about a time when, and so on. So we're gonna talk about that kind. Next we have situational questions, which have us solve or think through hypothetical situations. Usually this comes up in terms of ethics scenarios. Next we have the unconventional type of question. So these are kind of weird and wonderful questions where they ask you, for example, what kind of superhero would you be and why? And so I think the key with these questions, briefly, is to kind of keep calm and recognize that they're asking you about your character, yourself, your thinking. Like that's what the questions are there for. So before we approach any of these kinds of questions, knowing that they are asking you and they've invited you for an interview to know more about you, you should reflect on your values, your motivations, your strengths, your weaknesses, and your experiences, and try to develop stories around those. Because that's ultimately what they want to hear from you in your interview. And one thing that I think of in order to help me prepare my clients is to think about, like, what are the most important CV things that are already written out clearly in your OMSAS application. What activities do you think it's really important for the medical schools to know? And I keep it as a very limited list. And what do those experiences say about you? So if you prepare stories about each of those experiences, I think that will get you in the right direction to answer some of these questions. Now we're going to talk about specific questions. So tell me about yourself is a big question that people prepare around. It's a classic interview question outside of medicine as well. So for you to prepare a brief elevator pitch of who you are and why they should accept you. That's what I think of it as. And so you want to give a brief summary of your education and your experience, your most relevant accomplishments, what's your goals at the end of the day, and then what motivates you. So these are all kind of big things that should go in an elevator pitch about yourself. And so that's how you would approach Tell Me About Yourself. I encourage you to actually write down a script of what you might say in this question and practice it a few times. And you can practice a 2-minute version, which is more of a classic panel style interview, to 5 minutes. But again, try to be concise as possible and try to be flexible. This next style of question is behavioral. So here's an example of a behavioral question. Tell me about a time when you were working with a colleague who was not doing their share of their work. How did you handle it? So the key in recognizing this kind of question is they are specifically asking you, tell me about a time. And so it's important to be able to give a story. In the interview setting, a story needs to be clear to the listener in terms of your role, what you did, and what the result was. There's this method called the STAR method, which is a way of organizing that in your mind. So S is situation, T is task, A is action, R is result. You can see that here. And you can use this to organize your thinking around a behavioral question. So I encourage you to, in your practice now, to even write this out. Like write out what is the situation, what is the task, what is the action. So in particular with the result, it's important, I think, to talk about what happened in the situation, but also to say what this story tells about you. And in particular, when we're talking about these qualities, what does it say with respect to that? So the STAR method is a helpful tool in approaching behavioral questions. So we've spoken about both the behavioral questions and one really important classical question, which is the tell me about yourself. Now, we're going to talk again about some tips about preparing beforehand. So here are some of the tips. So you can dress up like a real interview, have eye-level camera. All right. So here's what you can do now to best prepare for your remote interview. So I think the important thing is to be as prepared as possible. So to that end, here are the CanMeds rolls again. Always good to look at. So your next steps should be to make sure you're well prepared for this online interview. I think there's a lot that is, there are a few things that are new about this style of interview. I think it's going to be new for everybody. So it's important to remember that you are kind of in control of, you should just optimize the things that you're in control of, and then things that you aren't in control of, I would not spend time worrying about it. You should be prepared in terms of practicing the questions. I think that's very much in your control. And so engaging in thoughtful practice, doing practice questions with your friends or with an interview coach is a helpful use of your time. In particular, think about those bread and butter questions, like why do you want to be a doctor? Tell me about yourself. Having good, thoughtful answers for that ready. With respect to the environment, make sure that you are practicing as much as possible in the location you will be interviewing. Make sure when you go for that interview that you're in control of interruptions in the environment, and then being aware of your body language. So that is the end of my talk. MD Consultants is a company which provides online interview prep. for medical schools. You could work with medical students or residents via video conference. To book an appointment, you can go to our website at mdconsultants.ca. The email address is there on the screen, or you could also leave a comment on this video and we'll get back to you.